presentations explained what are PFAS and what are PFAS in firefighting foams and how to identify them when you have thousands of PFAS, of which some of them needs to be regulated according to the Stockholm Convention, according to the European Union rule, and according to your national regulation, if you have already put in place, or that you have to revise your regulation to address those chemicals that are controlled under multilateral environmental agreements. So again, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, it's an international treaty. We have 186 parties to the convention, including Albania and the European Union, who has all of those member states that implement the Stockholm Convention according to EU regulation that is complying with the Stockholm provision. And other countries are also doing the same. The Stockholm Convention decides which chemicals needs to be controlled, and there's provisions that countries need to comply with. But in order to implement that international treaty, you need to have these legal measures or administrative measures put in place at the national level. And then you have to enforce it. You have to have the capacity to implement what is decided according to the international treaty that the country has agreed and ratified. So that's the Stockholm Convention that covers chemicals that are persistent, bioaccumulative, have adverse effects, and potential for long-range environmental transport. That means it travels to long distance. So that's what Daniel and also Eke has been explaining, how these chemicals, PFAS, that are surfactant and has some part hydrophobic, some part hydrophilic, that can travel long distance, is also quite toxic to human health and environment, and that requires global action for control. So the Stockholm Convention has several annexes. Annex A lists chemicals for elimination, and it has to stop. It has to stop production, use, import, export, and have to manage waste in an environmentally sound manner. But some of the chemicals are living chemicals. That means you're using it, it exists in products, it exists in firefighting foam, so you can't just stop right away. As opposed to dead chemicals like chlordecone, or some of these pesticides, you have stopped using it years ago. So only problem maybe is to manage the waste that have the chemical that you stopped using. But other chemicals like flame retardants or surfactants, industrial chemicals, they have ongoing use, and countries need time for phase out. Introduce alternatives, manage the chemical, the products or article that contain the chemical in an environmentally sound manner. So that is why there is specific exemption. Normally it is for 5 years. But for some of other exemptions that require longer time, for example for spare parts in other chemicals, that you might have longer years. So for example, even for PFOA, there's one exemption that has longer year, which is for application in pharmaceutical purpose. This one has longer year, and therefore you have review process. PFOS is listed in Annex B to the convention. It is for restriction, and it has, why it is different is because Annex B has acceptable purpose. Acceptable purpose means that the use is so important and that the alternatives don't exist. So you need to have that chemical allowed for use only for that purpose without expiry date. So we now have only 2 chemicals under this annex. One is DDT. DDT is used for malaria control, and despite the fact that there is vaccine, it's not that effective, I heard, and that the chemical sometimes is necessary to protect humans from dying by mosquito bites. So DDT use for malaria control is still allowed, and some countries have acceptable purpose for that. PFOS was initially listed in Annex B with acceptable purpose for firefighting foam as well, long back then in 2009. But because there is alternative now found, as you know, which is good alternatives that you can implement in different countries, they have decided to move from acceptable purpose to specific exemption, 5 years only for PFOS. Same as PFOA, which was listed 10 years later. And then in addition, we have another chemical, PFHXS, listed under the Stockholm Convention, but with no exemption. This one has no specific exemption. Even if you heard today that you can find it in firefighting foam or in the environment, this one has no specific exemption. Then another chemical, long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids. They're salts and related compounds. These chemicals will be considered for listing at the next COP coming up in a few months. So we have a bunch of PFAS chemicals under the Stockholm Convention that the countries need to take action at the national level. Otherwise, you know, even if it is agreed at the Stockholm Convention level, it will not be controlled unless it is done in your country, right? So Article 3 is about intentional use, intentional releases. The countries need to prohibit use, production, import, export of that chemical, except for the purpose of environmentally sound waste management. You can export it or import that thing, like PCB waste. You can export your PCB waste to some other country that can manage PCB waste in an environmentally sound manner. That's Article 3, and Article 4 provides specific exemption, I just explained. Article 5 is about unintentional release. So Annex C lists chemicals that are unintentionally released, like dioxins and furans. So Stockholm Convention also made such provision. You know, if you are following plastic treaty discussion, open burning is a big issue that is discussed there because it releases hazardous chemicals like dioxins and furans. But remember, these are already listed under the Stockholm Convention, and there's a provision about unintentional releases. Although PFAS chemicals are not listed under Annex C, you are supposed to control PFAS as intentionally used chemical, intentional release. Then Article 6 provides waste management. Here we need to cooperate with the Basel Convention, because the Basel Convention was there long before Stockholm, and that provides what it constitutes environmentally sound management. What does it mean? Can you just incinerate PFAS? How is it that you can manage contaminated sites, PFAS? So this is not considered under the Stockholm Convention, but you have to refer to the Basel Convention technical guidelines on PFOS, PFOA, and PFHXS. Well, so Annex B, I've already explained that it is listed with acceptable purpose. But currently, the only acceptable purpose we have for PFOS is insect bites with sulfuramide as an active ingredient for insect bites, for leaf-cutting ants. I don't know if you have ever seen these ants, but it exists in Latin American countries. They really, the picture is a bit blurred, but they really break down all the trees, and it's very strong animal that you can only control with this chemical, according to some countries in Latin America. It's because PFAS is a surfactant, and sulfuramide is an active ingredient that works for ants' nerve system. The queen of the ants gets a bit mad when they eat this the feed, and then the queen ant will eat all of the eggs. That's how you control the colony. Voila. For the specific exemption, we for firefighting foam and hard metal plating, but these will expire in December 2025, including you, Albania. So now Republic of Korea found a lot of firefighting foam stockpiles in their country. And for them also the specific exemption expires in June 2026. They have different dates because they are opt-in party and they ratified the amendment a little bit later. But then they realized that it is impossible to manage these stockpiles within the deadline. So they requested extension. And therefore the extension of another 5 years will be considered at the next COP for firefighting foam specific exemptions for PFOS and also PFOA. PFOA is listed with a lot of exemptions, a lot of applications that are possible for specific exemption. It is in Annex A, so no acceptable purpose, but only specific exemptions that parties can register, like for semiconductor, textiles, and so on. Firefighting foam is one of them. The Republic of Korea requested extension of another 5 years for PFOS and PFOA in firefighting foams only. And they said that they have put in place regulatory mechanism, however, they have challenges in managing stockpiles. Because firefighting foam, you don't use it every day, hopefully not. You use it when you have incident, and they are stored in those airports or other facilities that require managed treatment of liquid fuel fire when it happens. So lastly, PFHXS listed in Annex A with no specific exemptions. But again, if you want to make sure that these chemicals don't exist in firefighting foam, you need to know, you need to measure them, right? But the analytical standards don't really exist for many of these related compounds and so on. And so we've been hearing the need for establishing, standard analytical method and also the analytical standards that will allow you to measure concentration levels of these chemicals. Okay, so then I think for firefighting foam, I don't know how much more time I have, but for firefighting foam specifically, under the Stockholm Convention amendment adopted in 2019, we have several detailed provisions related to how PFOS and PFOA can be used or can be contained in firefighting foam. In new part 10, part 10 of Annex A and part 3 of Annex B. It says something like, notwithstanding paragraph 2 of Article 3, ensure that firefighting foam that contains or may contain PFOA or PFOS shall not be exported or imported except for the purpose of environmentally sound disposal. That means that even if you have specific exemptions, you cannot trade PFOS or PFOA containing firefighting foam, except for the purpose of environmentally sound disposal. Another important aspect is not to use PFOS or PFOA containing foam for training, because it's not necessary. You can train, hopefully, without those. Or if you, for testing purpose also, don't use them. And then you can only use it if you have contained the environment by 2022, or if it has the capacity to do so, but no later than 2025, which is this year. Restrict use of PFOS. Firefighting foam that may contain PFOS or PFOA to sites where all releases can be contained. It's very important. And then the final one, make determined efforts designed to lead to environmentally sound management of firefighting foam stockpiles and wastes that may contain PFOA or PFOS. So yes, so these additional obligations that you have for PFOS and PFOA provided in there. Yeah, here I have summarized those points. No import-export except for waste management, no training, use, and then restricted testing and usage restriction in the contained environment, and the environmentally sound waste management. Now, how would you do this at the national level? One most important initial step that each country needs to consider is to revise, update your national implementation plan according to Article 7 and reflect plan, how you implement the Stockholm Convention, what was agreed there. And then you report what you did under Article 15. This you have to do it every 4 years. And finally, the Convention has a mechanism to evaluate the effectiveness according to Article 16. So based on the information you provide in Article 15 reporting, and also the information you have in Article 7 National Implementation Plan, the Effectiveness Evaluation Committee will look at the progress made in the implementation of the Convention. So PFOS, PFOA containing firefighting foams is one of the most challenging tasks that each country has in order to put in place the regulatory mechanism and also capacity to manage both that is still used as firefighting foam and the stockpiles or waste that you need to manage it in an environment. Sound manner. Thank you very much.